And your rule for parenting is do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. And you kind of, in that one chapter, and it's not even one of your longest chapters, just did this wonderful sweeping overview of modern parenting and the problems, and in some ways that we're producing maybe some of these kids who are prolonging adulthood, prolonging the markers of adulthood. That you feel that parents, you said, you see today's parents as terrified by their children, not least because they've denied credit for their role as benevolent and necessary agents of discipline, order, and conventionality. And then you told some hilarious stories about when your wife ran a daycare center out of your house, and you would get into tests of wills with some of the 2-year-olds. But
yeah, they're tough, man. 2-year-olds can be really tough. You described
your son as ornery. I'm glad to hear he got married. Congratulations.
Tough kid. Yeah, so, he still doesn't want to do anything he doesn't want to do.
Yes.
He's very charming and very emotionally stable. So it's like he's easy to get along with, but trying to get him to do something he doesn't want to do, it's like he had my wife defeated when he was 9 months old. And she's tough, like seriously, she's no pushover. But he would just sit there with his mouth closed and glare at her. It's like, I'm not eating that, and I can take more than you can dish out. It was really something to see, to see that kind of force of will in someone that small.
Well, talk a little bit about that and just the modern roles between men and women. I mean, we're less, you're not really supposed to distinguish between fathers and mothers, even though that seems to inevitably happen in most.
Well, it happens in large part because the children differentiate between them. Like parents are under the delusion that most of what you do with your children is driven by what you want to do with your children, when in fact it's driven to a massive degree by what your children want you to do with them. And so there were studies done 30 years ago on feminist parents who decided that they were going to raise their children in non-gender differentiated manners. And when they were studied, they found that the parents who had that explicit philosophy were just as gender differentiated with their children as the parents who didn't have the philosophy. And the reason for that is that if you're a parent that has any sense at all, you don't respond to your children as a rigid ideologue. You respond to them as whatever it is the child manifests him or herself as. Like, with any individualized relationship, you take your cue from the person. And you might think, well, a child has no intrinsic nature. But if you think that, you either don't have children, or you've never seen a child, or you're so blinded by your ideology that you don't have a child. You just have a blank projection screen onto which you project your presuppositions, and then heaven help your child. So a lot of the gender differentiation is actually driven by the children's demands, and that's all for the good. That chapter, I thought I would get into tremendous trouble for writing that chapter because it's contentious right on the surface, just the rule, because the rule first implies that children can be dislikable. And then I would say again, it's like, have you met children?
Yeah, exactly.
Were you ever a child? Were there children you didn't like? Well, obviously, and so lots of children are dislikable, but it's taboo to admit that because they're all sweetness and light and innocence ever since Rousseau. But, Rousseau put all 5 of his children in an orphanage where they all died. So maybe we won't talk too much about Rousseau. And then the next taboo is, that parents can dislike their children. Right. But if you're a clinician and you don't think that parents can dislike their children, then you're not a clinician, because one of the things you constantly see is that pathology within families is an incredibly common source of psychological destabilization, right? And it's terrible tension between parents and their children and between siblings. What I suggest in the book, which I think is radical by today's standards, is that your fundamental job as a parent is to ensure that by the time your child is 4 years old, that they are maximally desirable to other children and to adults. Because what happens is that after the age of 4, you aren't the primary agent of socialization. The social world becomes the primary agent of socialization.